In the last video, I talked about, even though it might not be the most comfortable of experiences, I talked about the value in revisiting your high school years and attempting to learn from them. In this video, I want to talk about the value of going back even further and learning a bit about how you were raised. And specifically, in order to learn about how you were raised and why you were raised in those ways, you need to learn a bit about your parents and their backgrounds and what made them become the types of parents that they are. What happened to your parents in their past, in turn, affected how they were as parents, which in turn affected how you were raised, which will affect your development, which will affect your transition from university to post-university, which ultimately will affect your mental health. So, without further ado, let me tell you a bit about my parents and what I've learned about myself from learning about them. FYI, this is one of the longest videos in the series and also one of the most personal. In September of 1989, my parents, who were already married at the time, went for a little trip to East Berlin. My parents are from Bulgaria, and back then, since Bulgaria was under the communist rule, they could only travel to other communist places. So they went to East Berlin. And my mom has told me many times that one of the most depressing images that she has from her past is of seeing the Berlin Wall while it was still up. She said that the magnitude of seeing it and what it represented was just too much for her. A couple of months later, on November 9th, 1989, the unthinkable happened. Word started to spread on the news all over the world that there were people crossing from East to West Berlin and that the Berlin Wall, was coming down. My mom has also told me that she could not believe that something like this was able to happen in her lifetime. With the fall of the Berlin Wall, my parents recognized that life in Bulgaria was going to be very different and very chaotic in the next little while because of the implications that the wall coming down would have for the communist life in Bulgaria. They knew that what was going to come next was going to be messy and a transition, and ultimately they didn't want to have and to raise a child in this environment. So in January of 1990, January 20th, 1990, my parents left. They boarded a plane in Sofia, and they boarded with just their suitcases, not knowing a word of English or French, and only the equivalent of $120. And they headed off to Canada. And all they really knew about Canada at the time was that this one city called Montreal had hosted the Olympics once, and they had heard the name Pierre Elliott Trudeau floating around. Didn't know much. This was 1990. There was no internet, no Google, no Wikipedia, no website to book a hotel or a hostel, none of that. They were going in blind. The plane landed in the city of Montreal, and my parents got off the plane with their suitcases, with their equivalent of $120, and they left the airport and started a new life in Canada. That night, they stayed at a YMCA on Stanley in downtown Montreal, and soon after, they moved in with another Bulgarian couple that they'd gotten word of from people on the plane. It was 4 of them, sharing a studio apartment in a neighborhood in Montreal called NDG, and they slowly started building a new life in a new city, in a new country, with pretty much nothing. No money, no language, no social support network, no money from their mom and dads. Really, they started with nothing. And a year later, on January 27th, that child that they had wanted but didn't want to have grow up in their home country, that child that they had left everything back home so that they could move to a country where they saw a brighter future for him, that child on January 27th, 1991, was born. Whenever I think about this story and about what my parents did, of course I get inspired. Of course I feel deep admiration, and of course deep gratitude. For me, there has been no bigger gift than the gift that my parents gave me. The gift of a life in a first world developed country where opportunities can happen. Of course their story fuels me, and in a lot of ways just drives me. That inspiration has been there since I was little. However, as I've gotten older and really started to dig a little deeper by having lengthy conversations with my mom, I started to learn about the other aspects of their story, about the tougher aspects, about the aspects that really affected their mental health, which in turn affected their parenting, which in turn affected me and my mental health. My biggest life transition has been leaving university and leaving the life of school that I had known up until then for my whole life. For my parents, their biggest transition was leaving their home country, leaving behind everything and everyone and coming to a new country, a new continent where they knew nothing and no one, not even the language. I experienced identity shock and identity crisis and identity change after school when I lost my identity of being a student. But wow, the identity crisis that my parents had and went through when they came to Canada. My mom, and it was tough to hear. My mom has explained to me over the past couple years how when her and my father came to Canada, she was beyond terrified and confused and stressed and had no idea what was going on. She simply described it as shock. She also explained how my father was going through the same. She talked about how back in Bulgaria, she had gone to the finest art history school in the country and had really as good of a job as you could have in communist Bulgaria, and it was her dream job, which was being an editor. Fast forward to life in Canada, she didn't have the dream job, didn't have the status, the reputation. She was an early 30s woman learning English and French. She had an identity crisis. the scariest thing ever for her was having me. My parents had no idea how they were going to pull it off, how they were going to raise me. It wasn't like for a lot of other families in Canada who have money and stable jobs and houses and social support networks and grandparents to help out with babysitting and with giving them money and all that. It wasn't like the other families who knew about life in Canada and the culture and all these things that they didn't even have to think about. It was so steeped in their sense of self. Off topic, I remember my mom explaining, like, learning about Halloween and Thanksgiving, and that, like, every October 1st or October 31st, she should be giving out candy to kids dressed in costumes, and every Thanksgiving, cook a big-ass turkey and give thanks. Little things like that were so foreign to my parents at the time. So yeah, my parents were terrified at being parents in this new place, and they were terrified of failing as parents. My mom explained to me that all this led my parents to becoming, in their own way, depressed while I was growing up. She explained that because they had such low self-confidence during my youth, they didn't always have the confidence to really open up to me and to outwardly express their love and to provide me with a necessary amount of emotional support and emotional validation that I truly believe everybody needs, but especially every child needs while growing up. Emotional validation is like emotional mirroring. It's seeing the other person mirror back the emotion that you're projecting. So, if I come up to you ecstatic that I just got the job that I've been wanting for some time now, emotional mirroring would be you expressing joy and excitement back to me. By mirroring my emotions, you are validating my emotions. You are essentially showing me that you understand what I am feeling and that, as a result, my emotions matter. It's not just about the job that I got. It's about the emotions that I've associated with getting that job. Same thing with the opposite. If I came to you crying that I didn't get the job, by you expressing sadness and feeling bad and empathizing, you are validating my emotions and showing me that these emotions of mine matter, that they're worth being expressed. What doesn't constitute emotional validation? Whether I come to you in joy or in sadness and you simply respond, or, okay, great, oh no, awesome. It's if you respond in really an emotionless way or with the level of emotion that greatly differs from the level with which I approached you. I truly believe that for healthy development, for healthy mental health development, all of us, like not just children, we all need this emotional validation from loved ones. So back to my parents. They were depressed. They had low self-confidence. They were in shock. They doubted their abilities as parents. They also came from a country and a culture where the expression and the awareness of emotion was not the way that it is in North American culture. Emotions weren't really expressed where my parents were from in a way you don't really talk about your feelings. And if you're feeling down, you kind of bottle it up and suck it up and keep going. So not only were my parents, due to low self-confidence, not the best at validating my emotions, their background additionally contributed to this, especially to not validating my more negative emotions. One of my bigger struggles growing up was not being emotionally vacant. I have always been expressive in a lot of different ways. No, one of my bigger struggles was not being able to recognize a lot of my emotions for what they were. In high school, I experienced subtle forms of rejection and feeling unworthy, and I didn't really know how to go about labeling my feelings. And from there, trying to figure out the best course of action with how to deal with them. And in my household, in my teenage years, it just wasn't a thing. It just wasn't on my radar to approach my parents and talk to them about these things and feelings and to try to learn from them and make sense of them. With my parents, a lot of the times it was the classic, "Hey Brian, how was your day?" "Fine. It was good." Those type of conversations. So from my childhood to my teenage years to university and after university, because of the lack of emotional validation in our household, I didn't really have a lot of practice, so to speak, with dealing with negative emotions. I hadn't really developed coping mechanisms. When it came to positive emotions, I was a lot better because of my friend group and because we were great at and comfortable with expressing our love for each other and with validating our love for each other whenever it was brought up. Again, when it came to negative emotions, I didn't have too much practice because there weren't as many floating around. So all that to say that my tolerance for negative emotions was kind of low. It was a little rusty. So, when university ended and I went through the first real shock and turbulent time in my life, the first time when things weren't really going according to plan, it was a level of negative emotion that I'd never been exposed to and never had any real practice. And not even just no real practice with dealing with it, but no real practice in really recognizing and conceptualizing and labeling it for what it was. Not much by way of coping mechanisms. And because of their background and subsequent parenting, neither had my parents. And they didn't really know what to do when I was freaking out and breaking down and becoming depressed. None of us knew what to do. This period of time was bad not only for my mental health, but also for theirs. I just want to quickly say that this video is not about blaming my parents or criticizing them or throwing them under the bus or anything like that. I have shown them this video, and even before that, I picked their brains for this video to make sure that the information and the depictions were as accurate as possible. Just wanted to say that. If anything, I am so fortunate that even if there wasn't a lot of emotion in our house growing up, I am so fortunate that I always did know that my parents did and do love me and will do anything for me. They went through some massive changes in coming to Canada to have me. they were and still are committed to making sure I have the best life possible. What I am trying to get at with this video is, if you take the time to learn a bit about your parents and their background, you can learn a lot about how you were raised and why you were raised this way. And in turn, you can learn a lot about why you do certain things that you do as a teenager and as a young adult and as an adult. And you can learn about the types of people you gravitate towards, the types of people you get into relationships with, the types of opportunities you seek, the types of ways you respond to positive things, and the types of ways you respond to adversity. You can learn so much about yourself by learning about your parents. You can learn so much about your mental health by learning about your parents. I quickly want to go even a step further back in my parents' lives to hopefully drill even deeper in you the importance of learning about your parents. Let's start with my father. My father's father was a musician and was one of the few at the time in communist Bulgaria to get to travel to places like New York and LA, and he always brought my dad back things like Levi's jeans and stuff you couldn't get in Bulgaria. My father's parents divorced when he was young, and his father passed away when he was 20. My father's mother, she is an alcoholic who was more into drinking and her personal affairs than to pay much attention to my dad, and she even went as far as stealing money from him, and he has memories of being a kid and crying on the beach because he was all alone, and then he wandered off until he found his mommy at the bar. That was his childhood and his youth in a lot of ways. You think that affected him growing up? You think that affected him as an adult, as a parent, and in turn did this stuff affect me? Of course! Learn about your parents. Let's look at my mom real quick. My mom has struggled with weight issues since an early age, and she has these memories of her mom criticizing her and calling her fat, and a fond memory of complaining and crying to her parents when she was little about a pain in her side, and they disregarded it, so she walked by herself to the doctor's office, and they immediately called an ambulance, and when she got to the hospital, they right away sent her to surgery because it turns out that pain in her side had to do with her appendix. And if she hadn't done anything about it, if she had listened to her parents who disregarded it, if she hadn't gone to the doctor's office, she would have died. And when the doctors explained this all to her parents, my mom's parents didn't really show much about it. And of course, when my mom told her mom that she had a baby, her mom told her she wasn't capable of raising that child. That's a bit of my mom's past in a nutshell. You think that affected her growing up? You think that affected her as an adult, as a parent, and in turn did this stuff affect me? Of course, learn about your parents. This is for sure one of the longest videos, and for sure one of the most personal. And yeah, I just really wanted to illustrate what you can learn about yourself from your parents. So much of who you are is a function of those formative early childhood years. And so much of those years are a function of your parents and your guardians. Like I said with me, I learned a lot about emotional validation and its importance. I learned that from learning about my parents. Last thing, like many other people, over the years I have blamed and criticized and attacked my parents a lot. I do that far less now because I've taken some time to learn about them. And like I've quoted Good Will Hunting a bunch of times throughout these videos, in a lot of ways, it's not your fault. And in a lot of ways, it's also not your parents' fault. So learn about them and their background. Like, for instance, this man on my shirt, Vasil Levski. He led and organized the Bulgarian Revolution and the uprising in the 19th century against the Ottoman Empire and sparked the eventual liberation and recognition of Bulgaria as an independent country. And before that even happened, he was captured and executed, and he placed Bulgaria and its freedom over his own personal interest, over his own life, and he is the country's greatest hero and has a famous quote that's on the back of this shirt. If I shall win, I shall win for the entire people. If I shall lose, I shall lose only myself. I'm proud, man. I'm proud of my background.